All right, we've taken a look at a lot of different diagnostic tools, but what we're taking a look specifically at in this lecture is imaging, so medical imaging. And basically what we're trying to do here is to get a picture, but we need this picture to be an internal picture, essentially a picture of the inside of you without cutting you open. And so that's the goal of getting a medical image. And we're going to take a look at the different ways that we can do that. So medical imaging is quite new. Like there have been some tools that we used for quite a while, things like X-rays have been around for a long time, but there's a lot of modern techniques that we use in order to actually image the body. And it's extremely helpful because if you remember back to when we talked about a lot of the different body systems, one thing I kept mentioning is that anatomy determines physiology. The way you are built and the way things are structured, your anatomy, helps determine the way that things work, your physiology. And so by understanding the anatomy, by taking an image, you can understand how that's affecting the way that somebody's body is working. And that's the goal of what medical imaging is all about. If we can take an image of the inside of the body, we can actually start to diagnose where some problems might be coming from and then figure out treatments to move forward from that. The first one we really want to take a look at is what's called sonography. You probably know sonography by the term ultrasound, because that's what it is. But essentially what we're doing here is we are using sound in order to get a picture. And I know that may sound weird, but sound is just a wave, same as light. Light is just a wave. And so they work very, very similar. And that means that we can actually use sound waves in order to generate images. It's called ultra because ultra means extremely low. And so basically we're hearing, this is sound that is too low of a sound or a pitch or a frequency for us to actually be able to hear. It's like extreme bass. It's so much bass that you can't even hear it, kind of. So here's the way that it actually works. When you have an ultrasound, they use basically like a little sound emitter. And this is going to generate those ultrasounds, and it's going to send out sound waves. And those sound waves are going to be sent through whatever you're trying to take a picture of. And then they're going to bounce off of those things and come back. And every time a wave, like a sound wave, hits a new tissue or a new boundary layer, then what happens is the wave actually changes a little bit. And so as the wave changes, it first of all bounces off of that boundary layer, and some of it continues through the boundary layer. When it hits another boundary layer, it'll bounce back, and some will continue through. And when it comes back, you actually are able to detect it on the same device that is emitting the sound. So it's emitting the sound, but it's also detecting the sound coming back. And the machine that you're using actually calculates the distance for you, and it turns it into a picture. So it does like all the actual work for you, but you just have to essentially point it and then read what's coming out of it. The reason it works is because of the different boundaries, the different liquids, and the different tissues end up bouncing back sound. And then you can actually generate a picture from that. Think of it kind of like an echo. Essentially, you're getting an echo from different locations because it bounces back off of each different part. Okay, so that was how an ultrasound works and how we use sound to generate a picture, but all of the other pictures that we use in medical imaging use light. And if we're going to use light, we need to understand how light works. So the first thing is light is a type of electromagnetic radiation. We often abbreviate it EMR or EM radiation. This does not mean that light is dangerous for you. Radiation just means energy that is emitted from atoms. And so don't panic that we get bombarded with radiation, because every time you turn on a light bulb, you're getting hit by radiation. When you go out into the sunlight, you're getting hit by radiation. Don't worry about it. Most of it is totally fine. The other thing we need to understand is that light is a wave, which means that as light travels, it can travel up and down. Some of it will be bunched up really close together as it travels up and down, and some of it is spread really far apart as it travels up and down. And this determines the kind of light that we end up seeing, because there are many different types of light. So to understand a little bit more about light, we need to understand a little bit more about waves. So waves, they travel in a pattern similar to this, which means light kind of travels in a similar pattern like this. The top parts are what we call crests, sometimes called peaks, and at the bottom are called troughs. There's two major things that we look at. There is what is called the amplitude, and basically that's the distance from the center of the wave to the bottom, or the center of the wave to the top. That's what we would call the amplitude. The amplitude, when it comes to light, is actually telling us the brightness. The brighter a light, the greater the amplitude. When it comes to sound, this is actually volume. So if you're using an ultrasound and you wanted greater amplitude, you'd turn the volume up. The really important part for us, though, is what is called the wavelength. So the wavelength is literally the length of one wave. And that is the distance basically from trough to trough, but you could also measure it from peak to peak. And as long as you basically pick one point, travel all the way to the next point that it repeats in that fashion, that's what we call a wavelength. Wavelengths change, and the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy. The longer the wavelength, the lower the energy. I always think about it like this. If a wave is traveling up and down nice and slowly, that's not a lot of energy. If a wave is traveling up and down really fast, that's a lot of energy, right? Hopefully a wave doesn't look like that, but you get the point, right? The faster it is going up and down, the higher the energy, because the shorter the wavelength. When it comes to humans, basically blue light, well, actually not even humans, just the nature of light. Blue light has shorter wavelengths. Red light has longer wavelengths. Red light is slightly lower energy than blue light. There's also more light than we can see. So below this, there is what is called ultraviolet light. And that's light that we can't actually see with our eyes. Other animals like bees and some kinds of birds can see ultraviolet light. Below ultraviolet light, even shorter, are X-rays. And even shorter than that, the highest energy type of light are gamma rays. The other direction, things that have less energy than red light would be infrared. This you probably know better as heat. Heat is just a type of light that's emitted from matter, and so it comes in the form of infrared radiation. Below that are microwaves. So microwaves, they're even longer than red light and even longer than infrared, and they're able to shake molecules. That's how your microwave works. It's also how your cell phone emits its signals, is using microwave light. And above that is what we would call radio waves. And radio waves are literally how radios carry waves. They are very, very long waves, like kilometer-long wavelengths. So extremely long wavelengths. And they carry the least amount of energy. Okay, an X-ray. An X-ray has higher energy light than we can see. Humans cannot see X-rays, but they still interact with other types of matter. So when we get an X-ray, what we're really doing is turning on a light bulb. And that light bulb, instead of like giving off light that we can see with our eyes, it's giving off this really short wavelength light, and it's able to actually be such high energy that it passes through your body. And so you can't see it, but it goes right through your body. The only thing it cannot go through is your bones. So X-rays cannot travel through bones. They also have trouble traveling through fluid. So what you end up seeing on an X-ray is essentially like you have trouble seeing the bones because the light doesn't, or you have trouble actually seeing the soft tissue, and you see the bones because the bones block the light, and you're able to get a picture of them that way. So that way, if you have, let's say, like a break in your bone, this is a terrible break, but you know, let's say you wanted to image this, you would take a photo of it using X-rays, and the light is actually able to pass through that break. And so you're able to see it on the X-ray and be like, oh, okay, that's where it's broken. That's what we need to deal with. The other time is sometimes you can see fluid buildup because the X-rays have trouble traveling through fluid as well. But essentially that's what it is. It is just a type of light that is able to pass through your body. Because it is lower light, X-rays can actually react with living tissue, which is why you have to wear the big lead aprons. This X-rays can't travel through lead. And so if you wear that big lead apron, usually it's over things like your reproductive organs to make sure that it doesn't react with your living tissue in your reproductive organs and change them. And so it's just an extra precaution to make sure you're not exposed to too much radiation, really only the area that they need to image. What you end up seeing, though, is something that is two-dimensional. It is like a flat picture, so you don't get a 3D image, but you can actually detect things on an X-ray because, like I said, light is able to actually pass through. And you can even see in this X-ray, you know, there's like a line here and a line here, and you can see those because of boundary layers, so that's kind of like the muscle and skin layers. But really, it's quite good at taking pictures of bone. It's able to see fluid-filled spaces. Sometimes it can see tumors because they're a little bit different in shape and size than the rest of the tissue around them. But like I mentioned, X-rays can actually break down body tissue. So you're only allowed to get a certain amount of X-rays. And if you're pregnant, they try to avoid giving you X-rays so that they don't expose the embryo or the baby to any X-rays. That being said, your chances of getting things like cancer from X-rays are so extremely low that you don't have to worry about it. But if you are an X-ray tech, you do have to monitor your radiation exposure. Now, something else we can do is what is called a CT, sometimes also called a CAT scan, and it is computer axial tomography, which is a fancy way of saying it uses a computer to take images from lots of angles and get a slice, get a picture all the way through of what your body looks like. So this is a CT machine right here. And you'll notice it is a big circle, and that's because of the way that it works. There is an X-ray in here that shoots its light through, but then it rotates around in a circle. And as it rotates, it's able to take an image by basically taking a whole bunch of pictures from different angles as it travels around. And this is the kind of picture that you can get out of it. The other thing we can do with a CT scan is they are able to actually slide, or like actually it's not the CT machine that slides, the table slides. And so as the table pushes you through, basically, if you think about a person lying on that table, the CT scan is able to take pictures in like a huge amount of slices and basically be able to see what they look like all the way through. And you get these really clear pictures. So if we're looking at this picture right here, change my color, right here and right here, those are kidneys. This right here, spinal cord. This over here should probably be something like the spleen. And you kind of are able to start detecting some of the different things that are happening. You even have like sections of small intestine, sections of large intestine. And so you're able to start figuring out what's going on by looking at a CT scan such as this. Now, well, sometimes X-rays aren't enough. We need to actually be able to see more. And so one of the things we do is we use fluoroscopy. Because we can only see fluids and bones or hard structures with an X-ray, it means that we need to add something to X-rays to help us be able to see in areas that are made of soft tissue. So this picture that you're seeing right here, you may not realize it right now, but you're looking at somebody's heart. And you notice you can't actually see the heart, but what you can see are the blood vessels that are traveling through the heart. So these are the blood vessels that are actually supplying the heart with blood. You notice, I'm just going to erase right here, right in this spot, it narrows. So this person actually has a clog in their artery. Same right here, there's a huge narrowing clog in the artery, and that's going to restrict blood flow. And you can only see this because they are injecting a dye through the arteries so that you can see what's going on. So that's what fluoroscopy is. It's when we use a fluid, a special fluid that gets injected using a catheter. Remember, that's the tube that we insert inside of your arteries. So you have your artery, we push that wire through, and then the tube is able to travel. We can also inject a dye through there, and then that dye is able to fill up inside of your arteries, and we can take a picture and see what's going on. Usually these are live. So instead of taking a still photo, you're taking a video so that you can see what's happening as the dye flows through the arteries. Something else we can do is image the intestinal tract. And to image the gastrointestinal tract with an X-ray, we need something to help us image it because it's soft tissue, so it's not going to show up on an X-ray. What we do is we have the patient swallow barium, or sometimes they might get an enema of barium, which means it's inserted in the rectum. And then what happens is that shows up on the X-ray. So that actually blocks X-rays and shows up on our picture. And you can see in this image, this person's large intestine, right? So you can see how their large intestine is, and you could find any potential blockages in their large intestine using this technique. One of the most useful things we have, though, is what is called MRIs. An MRI is a magnetic resonance image. They are really useful because they help us see soft tissues and hard tissues. The only problem is they're really, really expensive to buy and really, really expensive to run. The other thing is because they work with extremely powerful magnetic fields, you can have absolutely no metal in an MRI. If you have metal in an MRI, it will actually pull it off of whatever you have. And in some reports, there are people who say that their tattoos, which have, if you have certain kinds of dye, your tattoo may have iron that's magnetic inside of it. And the MRI machine may actually tug on it, and people will feel like tingling inside of tattoos. It's an extremely, extremely strong magnet. So here's the way it works. An MRI is able to use enough magnetic energy to shake protons that are inside of hydrogen atoms. Your entire body is mostly made out of carbon, but connected to that carbon are hydrogen atoms. So basically what happens is the MRI machine causes those to start shaking. So they start shaking as the MRI gets turned on. What that does is release energy out into the MRI. The MRI then is able to actually detect it That's what this big like circular structure is right here. That's the actual MRI machine. So as it starts shaking your protons, they release energy, and then that energy gets picked up by the detectors inside of the MRI machine, and then it outputs all of that data into a picture. So basically, it shakes all of the hydrogen atoms in your body and takes a picture of them while they shake. You get incredibly detailed images, and because you can actually image things that are soft tissue, you can get images of the brain, you can get images of the lungs, of the heart, of the kidneys, you can see all sorts of things going on, and you can get really good pictures and really clear, defined pictures. This also works similar to a CT scan, where in an MRI, you're laying down on a table, and then they're actually going to move it so that you can get essentially like pictures taken in the form of slices. And so they're able to image all of these different sections. So in this diagram here, what you're actually looking at are the sections of the brain, basically different depths of the brain, so that you can determine what's happening. So you can actually see like here, like these ones up here, these are at the top of the brain, whereas down here, this is the bottom of the brain. And you can actually even see in these diagrams the eyeballs, right? Like these are the person's eyeballs, and it's taking a cross section of their eyes. And so you can get lots of detailed images about internal structure without having to cut anybody open. That's pretty crazy that we can even do that. So this is an MRI of somebody's knee. And this is basically the front of their knee, or like this, actually I should say the side. We shouldn't say front. This would be one side of their knee, right here. And then basically they're just going in deeper with this photos until they eventually start getting to the other side. This is the other side of their knee. And so you can actually get these images. But look at what you can see. This is the bone. So here's their femur right here. But you can also see, the bone that's on the lower part, their fibula and tibia, but you can also see the fluid-filled spaces. And you should even be able to see things like ligaments. And so you could find out if somebody has torn a ligament using an MRI, whereas an X-ray, you would never see that because it's a soft tissue. Something else we can do is what's called a PET scan, a positron emission tomography. So essentially the way that this works is we are able to take a photo of cells that are using sugar. So we put a special type of glucose, sugar, inside of their blood, and it's slightly radioactive, not that it's going to hurt you, but that it shows up when you take a CT or an MRI scan. And then what ends up happening is you see the areas light up on the scan where this glucose is being processed. It actually shows you which cells are using energy, which means which cells are active. This is a really good way to start imaging things like brain activity, but you can also image areas that are using too much energy and are maybe abnormally formed, which tend to be cancerous. Cancer cells take a huge amount of energy and sugar and oxygen away from the rest of your cells. So you can start looking for the ways that things are actually working. And this helps us understand a little bit more about how some of those parts of your body are functioning. So that is medical imaging. That's how we take pictures of the internal environment of your body and use it to understand how things are taking place. So thanks for watching. And that is how we diagnose patients.